Hey, Philip Wolf, founder of Swivel. It'd be great, but if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your business.
Sure that. Thank you very much for having me, Alex. I'm co-founder and CEO of Swivel. Swivel is a company that is out to change the perception of neurodiversity at workplaces, in communities, and beyond. We're using immersive technology for that. So imagine putting on a VR headset and you experience the world through the eyes of an autistic child at school or on a playground in a supermarket. But also really, really important, imagine experiencing the experience of a coworker with ADHD in a town hall meeting or in an onboarding call or recruitment session or one-on-one meeting. It's really about creating the opportunity to build perspective. So when we say, I write the number 6 on a piece of paper and put it between two people. I see the number 6, the other person sees the number 9. We can argue about this till eternity, but ultimately it's the same piece of paper and it's the same number, but it shows so inherently how different perspective changes how we perceive the world. And we want to enable people to perceive the world through someone else's perspective. And with that, actually build perspective and maybe create a little bit of this. If someone else might feel like this in this situation, maybe it's okay for me to feel in a situation a little bit uneasy or a bit different. So it's about acceptance and self-acceptance. On the enterprise side, we're attaching all of those immersive scenarios to immersive seminars. So it's about learning why it's important to use strengths-based language, why it's important to be neuro-inclusive at work, why it's important to be accepting to other perspectives and how this unlocks productivity and innovation potential and ultimately brain capital, something even the G7 leaders in June this year have called for as an economic priority. So really timely and something that already shows traction from Fortune 1000 companies around the world.
And what inspired you to start this company?
This is an interesting story. My majority of my background has been in the film and entertainment industry. So I spent the last 15 odd years producing visual effects for feature films, be it Godzilla, King of the Monsters, be it Game of Thrones, Ghost in the Shell, Knives Out, Glass Onion, things like this. And my now co-founder, Katie Mitchell, approached me with her master's thesis around autistic hypersensitivity and utilizing immersive experiences to give you an experience about that. And it really, really resonated with me. I was like, this is something we need to get to the world. This is something we need to show at scale. This is something we need to make available for everyone. And fast forward about a year from that moment, I myself got diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and giftedness. And this is kind of where everything fell into place. And I realized why it resonated with me, because it is something I was unknowingly longing for throughout my life, that people have the opportunity to kind of maybe not understand, but maybe better relate to how my experience might differ from theirs.
And what do you think are the biggest misperceptions with these sorts of things? Because I think for me, I've got ADHD and I was diagnosed later in life at the age of like 27. And when I was younger at school, I was always called lazy, forgetful. Whereas then as an adult, I realized that, oh, my brain's just different. I'm wondering your thoughts on this and if you've had similar experiences.
Absolutely. I got diagnosed when I want to say 38. So also later in life. And it kind of gave you a perspective on your past life. And for me personally, it went into an existential crisis because I reviewed my whole life. I realized I got bullied in school, not only from other pupils, but also from teachers. I realized that there are so many things that just didn't make sense, suddenly started to make sense and got a different light on them. So I totally get that. But it also always raised the question of what if? What if I would have been diagnosed earlier? What if I would have known earlier? What if what if, right? And realizing a lot of these conditions, more autism than ADHD, but ADHD as well, when you're getting diagnosed, you usually get a tag of presumed incompetence. So what happens is you're getting put into special ed classes because in unfortunately many jurisdictions, it's still considered an intellectual disability. And with that is like, your child has autism, your child has ADHD. We need to put you in a special ed class. This special ed class might move slower. The special ed class might not even get beyond fifth grade level learning content. So this doesn't provide you the opportunity to actually become something in life. I got diagnosed when I was 38, and I was an executive in the film industry. I'm now running my own company. So would this have all changed if I would have diagnosed earlier? Would there have been this presumed incompetence? And I had situations where I told people about my diagnosis: autism, ADHD, giftedness. And after I told them, I was talked to like I'm stupid. I was like, to be fair, most people don't know what giftedness is, but is I, you know me, why are we talking this way now? So there's a massive stigma, there's a massive bias attached to it. And a lot of this bias is systemically self-made over time, because a lot of the research around autism was white boys, white children, and the image you have in your mind when you hear about autism is the child in the supermarket having a tantrum. But actually, it's not a tantrum, it's a meltdown. And actually, it's not the child, it's the supermarket. It's an environmental input that causes and provokes the meltdown. So my hypothesis, that not every cognitive scientist might agree.
It's almost as if like the world's wrong rather than them being wrong. Like if they had the right environment, they would flourish probably a lot more than other people will. But the world's made for neurotypical people.
Is it?
More so, I would say.
It's a big part of what we're talking about is a strengths-based language and this changing language. One way we've coined is accessibility is not about accommodating deficits, it's about enabling differences. The big challenge we have in our society is that we see accessibility as a burden, because accessibility is a cost. Accommodations for people are a cost. So it's always going to be a burden to society. But if we if we really just change how we talk about accessibility, and we talk about accessibility as enabling differences, we suddenly realize we're not talking about a cost. We're talking about a societal impact opportunity. Because let's use as an example movies. So let's say 5% of the people going to movies, and I'm just grabbing numbers out of thin air, so don't quote me on the numbers. 5% of the people going to movies have a hearing impairment. So they're heavily helped by subtitles. Subtitles cost money. Someone has to write them, someone has to put them in the movie, and so on and so forth, right? Then you have to create the screeners with those subtitles. Then the movie theaters has to have screenings with those subtitles. So it's all costs, right? It's just adding up, bling, 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 bling. They need to be distributed. Today, we don't need to send rolls of film around anymore. Today, it's a digital cinema package that we can send via digital transfer methods. Great. So that's not as expensive as it used to be, but still, it's expensive. So we could now say, okay, if it's 5%, 5% less box office, it's still a lot of money, so let's do it. But we could also say, oh, maybe it's just 1%, don't do it. But the question becomes, the person who is not able to perceive and to experience that movie, who is that person? We don't know. Who are we taking away from getting inspiration for something more? Maybe it is the next Orson Welles. Maybe it is the next Albert Einstein. And this inspiration of that subtitled movie was maybe what it needed to move forward. So when we start looking at accessibility as a societal opportunity and not as a societal burden, we suddenly start to understand that there's more to life than normalism. Because fairly honestly, when you mentioned neurotypical, it's easier to diagnose autism than it is to say who's neurotypical. What does neurotypical even mean? Who is neurotypical?
I think we know it as a society. I think it's just a term that's been coined. I would say neurotypical is somebody without a diagnosis. That's probably what it means right now. In 100 years, we'll probably realize that brains are all made differently and neurotypical may not exist, or maybe it's a small box that but yeah, I think we're very very behind in terms of research in mental health, neuro conditions, whether you want to use the word condition. There's many ways of saying it, but yeah, I think we're very far behind. But it's interesting you mentioned Einstein there as well. There's a lot of greats, especially in the entrepreneur space, who've got ADHD and similar things. Do you, as you briefly touched on earlier, do you think your diagnosis or how your brain is has contributed to you being an entrepreneur? And if so, how much?
Yes, and 100%. I think it's the way your brain is, the way you're thinking, the way you perceive the world is everything who you are. And my diagnosis has mostly contributed for me to accepting myself. Because before I was like, oh, I shouldn't be like this. And I was constantly fighting myself. It's like, oh, nobody else is doing this. Oh, why do I have a problem with this? Why can't I just? Why can't I just? And realizing, for example, that just is never just. Even in justice, very seldom just is just. So it really gave me the opportunity to go on to a journey of self-acceptance of like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I feel. This is what I perceive. And people around me might perceive it differently. And before I was, my psychiatrist said it quite interestingly. It's like, before I tried to behave like a horse to fit into a herd of horses, but now I know I'm a zebra and was never intended to fit into a herd of horses. So it's really about understanding that you are who you are. And fairly honestly, everyone is who they are. But what we tend to do when we feel emotions, when we get ruffled up on something, we look outside. We look at everyone else. It's like, oh, I'm upset because of you. I'm upset because this person cut me off on the street. No, you're upset because of all of the experiences you had to that moment. The person cutting you off was just a thing that surfaced it. And you don't know why this person cut you off. Maybe they have a partner in the hospital. Maybe they had a really bad day. You don't know. And getting a diagnosis and getting to understand this perspective of getting this perspective for myself actually enabled me to have these kinds of conversations with myself. Like, okay, maybe it's okay to accept me for who I am, not fight myself. And at the same time, shifted how I see other people. It shifted me from being judgmental towards other people to be curious to other people.
In general, why do you think that it is that neurodiversity rates are much higher amongst entrepreneurs?
I think very briefly, we are all neurodiverse. Not everyone is neurodivergent, but everyone is neurodiverse. Everyone perceives the world differently. But why I think the rate is higher and perceptually higher is if you are someone who wants to challenge the status quo, you somehow need to think differently. Because if we say neurotypical or normal is a thing, then go by it with statistics. If we go by statistics, law of large numbers, you likely end up at around the same numbers as the guesstimates at the moment, at about 80% are neurotypical and 20% are neurodivergent. But those 80% are more likely, because they're 80%, to be in the day-to-day, in the non-challenge the conformism world, while the 20% are anyways always challenging themselves with living in a world that might not be designed for them, have a higher likelihood of going into, oh yeah, let's try this new. Oh yeah, let's reinvent this. It's 80-20, right? There's still going to be 80% of entrepreneurs who are not going to be, or likely, I don't know, likely not neurodivergent. It's also okay. But when you look back in history, and we have a social media series, every Friday we post about a potential neurodivergent individual who changed history. And if you look back in history, Albert Einstein, very likely autistic. Nikola Tesla, very likely autistic. Nikola Tesla, if you don't know, is not the person who did the car. It's the person who brought you alternating current and with that electricity to your homes. A crazy one, even though a little bit leaning into the unknown. There's a guess that Johannes Gutenberg was dyslexic. So dyslexia, as you have overly simplified, you have a different perception of writing and reading. And what did Gutenberg do? He invented the movable printing press to accommodate his writing and reading. And with that created knowledge culture that we still have today. And this is always that way. If you look into the past, be it good or bad, very important, bad is also a possibility. Most people are neurodivergent who have changed the world.
Certainly. And yeah, in many fields, from scientists to entrepreneurs, their experiences breed a way of where you're always challenging the status quo and you're used to the difference. So going against the grain, doing something different is not abnormal like it would to somebody who's classed as neurotypical. So for sure. And when you were a child, did you always know you wanted to be something like creative or entrepreneurial?
As a child, I think my first dream profession was architecture, building something, designing something, building something. And then I found physics, and I really, really enjoyed physics. And I think this, if my school trajectory would have gone, I would likely be a physicist today, but it didn't. So hence, I did many things.
That's quite typical of like a neurodivergent career path, doing many things, because I myself was the same. I think if my school experience was good, probably would have gone to university, studied philosophy, maybe become a lecturer, or got a normal job, but instead tried many things and went down the entrepreneurial path because I hated the structure of the school system and the corporate system. So, and I see that amongst many neurodivergent people for sure. And how do you see, we've touched a little bit on Swyvl, but how do you see Swyvl changing the world and really being able to help on this?
When you enable people to embody someone else's perspective, you tend to create very impactful and meaningful opportunities for reflection. In our early tests, we're already seeing that. It's when, let's use as an example, a sales team. A sales team goes through our seminars and learns about perspective taking. It's not about learning about autism. It's not about learning about ADHD. It's about learning about different perceptions, different perspectives. And giving that as an opportunity to a sales team offers up explanation, and it offers up these opportunities of reflection of, okay, I'm presenting this like this and this, but I'm constantly met with a question. I'm constantly met with that. I'm not getting anywhere. Because you have your sales script, maybe, or you have your groove you have, and this groove works with, likely again, 70-80% of all people, Occam's razor, right? But maybe not with the 20 or 30% of people. So it's about gaining that perspective that some people might perceive the same information differently than you, differently than other people. And with that extended horizon, you're able to adapt what you're doing. You're able to realize that, okay, maybe I shouldn't have my sales call in a restaurant where people are talking, or should have the sales meeting in a restaurant, because it might be for some people very distracting to sit in a restaurant, which fairly honestly is likely also fairly irritating, even though maybe not as on the forefront, for people who are not neurodivergent to make a sales meeting in a restaurant. Yes, I've done hundreds of meetings in restaurants, but I know for myself, if I sit with my back to an open room, that takes a lot of energy away. If it's a noisy environment around of me, it takes a lot of energy away. If and all of this energy needs to come from somewhere, right? Let's assume your body has you have 100% energy, and suddenly 40% of this energy go to sitting with your back to the open room, and another 30% go to the noises in the room. So I have 30% of my energy left to have a conversation about sales. And that's for me. But let's say you are non-autistic, non-ADHD, you might not perceive it that way. You might be like, oh yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I might have even a problem with when I'm sitting in a quiet room. But this is what shows that every person perceives it differently. So if you are training a sales rep to understand that every person perceives it differently, The sales rep can ask questions. That sales rep can make sure that they're building the environment that works best to make the sale. And I think this is where it can be transformative. And it's, of course, when we're looking at more the generalized approach of training in our first seminar, it's more about creating an understanding for different perceptions at large and highlighting things like, oh, there might be people who are bothered by flickering lights. There might be people who might not be able to speak up in a meeting, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing coming, that they're not interested. There might be people who are playing around with a stim toy. The time doesn't mean that they're disinterested, doesn't mean that they're not focused on what you have to say. It's really about creating a sense of acceptance, and acceptance in our eyes unlocks curiosity. Curiosity unlocks innovation. Innovation unlocks productivity, and suddenly everything gets better.
Certainly. And I don't know anybody who doesn't perform at their best when they're not being accepted. I think when you're in the best environment, you're accepted and you can be yourself, is when you can perform your best. If you're under unnecessary pressure, I think that applies to nearly everybody, whether your class is neurodivergent or not. So yeah, for sure. And it seems like, from what you've been telling me, from what I've read about your business, there's so many applications for this, from, like you say, sales reps to people in schools, helping them understand other children. There's so many applications. Why do you think something like this hasn't been created already? Do you think maybe it's we're not far enough forward in terms of technology, or maybe it's an understanding of society, or both, or other factors?
So we are not the first with something like this. So there are many coaches out there, many people, many individuals out there, even smaller organizations out there who are doing neurodiversity training. There are applications out there that you can use for perspective taking. So, for example, there's a short film, a VR short film called Lou by Martine Asenat. She's director of it. It's unfortunately not readily available on the Quest store, but this short film tells the story of an autistic child going through childhood, going into adolescence. And if you ever have the opportunity and it's exhibited somewhere close by, should definitely watch it, because it gives you an idea of perception. But it also uses computer simulation. It uses computer graphics to relate. And the big challenge is the scalability thereof, because every person is different. Every situation is different. So how do we assure that this is scalable? And this is where we come in with our approach of creating relatable everyday scenarios using real people, real locations, and trying to be as close to what you are used to see as possible. And this is where our unique background comes in, because most of our team comes from the entertainment world. So, like I said earlier, I spent most of my time producing visual effects for tentpole productions in Hollywood. And it's about creating visually pleasing. And this is a very important point. When utilizing our immersive scenarios, it's not going to be the autistic experience of your child or of your colleague. It's going to be a generalized artistic representation thereof. Because if you have met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Every person's perception is different. Not only people with autism, every person's perception is different. And that's the important bit. And the artistic representation and the generalization is important to make it non-alienating. Because we want you to be curious. We want you to come back. We want you to experience more, to learn more. And if I would put anyone into my experience, this would likely push them over the edge. So, because we are used to our experience, right? And we're sometimes not even used to our experience. And there's a very interesting experiment for that everyone can do at home. You go into your bathroom, reduce the light if you have the possibility, and you just sit in front of the mirror and you look yourself in the eyes. And you do this for about 5 minutes. Because your brain is not used to seeing yourself. Your brain is used to see everything else, but it doesn't know you. And you might actually see when you're doing this how your face starts to morph, how things start to distort, because your brain is learning you. And this shows how powerful perception itself can be. If there are any neuroscientists listening, I know it's utterly oversimplified. Yeah. So this is what the power is that can be yielded. And our approach is really, we're working with people who have neurodevelopmental conditions or different neurotypes. We have them in our team. We interact with them. We are also working with cognitive scientists, behavioral scientists, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, leaders in virtual reality and immersive, in AI, and so on and so forth. So we have created a team that is highly knowledgeable about the topic, which is also utterly unique to be able to do that. And the next thing that makes what we're doing unique is the scalability. Because our seminars on the enterprise side, yes, they can be in person, they can be virtual, but most enterprises these days are opting for self-guided. So they can also be self-guided. But on the other hand, people at home have a Netflix-like experience. An experience they're used to is like, oh, I'm choosing a scenario. And then the next thing, accessibility is a big thing. I cannot expect you to have a VR headset. It's like £300, $500 Canadian. So this needs to work on your TV. This needs to work on your iPad. This needs to work on your computer, on your phone, because it needs to be accessible. Yes, it might not have the same impact because it's not as immersive as being in virtual reality, but it needs to be accessible. And this is our whole approach: is everything needs to be accessible to as many people as possible, be it low internet connectivity in your area, or
it's really interesting, and that experiment has stuck with me now. I'm definitely going to try that for sure.
It's freaky.
For sure.
It's freaky.
I was also almost like feeling as if I was doing it when you said it. Like I was almost ready to feel freaky because I was like that. I just imagine myself seeing my face in the dark. So yeah, for sure. Last question I normally ask is, what is the best piece of advice you've been given or an inspirational quote? But I'd like to ask you something slightly different. I'd like to ask you, and forgive me if I'm using the wrong vocabulary, but what is one thing you wish people knew about neurodiversity? What is something you wish people knew, or what is the biggest misunderstanding or the biggest misconception we have as a society? There's many, but
I think the biggest misconception is that when we look at something that seems differently to what we know, what our experience reflects, we see it as something off the norm, outside of the norm. We see it as something sometimes maybe even broken. And it is the realization that this is based on your perception. This is not the other person's perception. It's learning to accept yourself for your perception, to enable yourself to accept other people's for their perception. Because I mentioned it a couple of times, everyone perceives the world differently. And we are alienating and marginalizing groups because they're different to us, they're different to our experience. But everyone has a different experience. So thinking about that and thinking about why we then marginalize a certain group might create the question in yourselves like, but if my best friend also experiences the world differently based on all of their experiences, why am I not marginalizing them? And that's the question you can then move forward onto all the marginalized groups. Like, why am I marginalizing them? Because they are different skin color, they're different gender, they have a different neurotype. It's really, we're always only able to see our experience. And we assume other people's experience based on what we think their experience is. So actually, it's our experience that informs their experience. So look inwards, don't look outwards, and start accepting yourself before you judge others.
Yeah, fully agree. And yeah, Philip, thank you ever so much for coming on. Great to hear about you. Great to learn more about Swyvl. I think it's amazing what you're doing, and we'll definitely be following along. And I think the problem that you're solving is one of the world's biggest existential problems. I think if we can understand others more, especially because trying to communicate experience is different. If we can actually experience others' experiences, I think the world will be a better place, and not just better, more productive, happier, everything, by every metric. So thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.